You've always been the burden of this family. That was the last straw. While they blamed me for everything and praised my brother like he could do no wrong, I quietly walked away. A month later, everything fell apart. Hit like, share, and comment 1 if you've ever been treated like the problem in your own family. I don't even remember the last time my parents looked at me with pride. They saved that for Ethan, even when he was reciting a speech I wrote. The first time I remember realizing that something was wrong, I was 9 years old. Ethan had just won a citywide history speech contest. Well, won was a generous term. He read my draft word for word, even keeping my notes about timing and pauses. Everyone clapped. My parents beamed. I stood to the side, my participation reduced to a silent ghostwriter. My mother leaned down and whispered, "See how great your brother is? You should learn from him." That was the beginning of the erosion. Not explosive, just steady, like water, quietly carving stone. Back then, our family looked perfect from the outside. Whitmore Supply Depot was thriving. Dad was respected in Portwell, Mom hosted bake sales and book clubs. Ethan was varsity everything, and I stayed out of the way. If I earned a certificate, it was glanced at. If Ethan showed up late to dinner, they warmed his plate. When I was accepted into the gifted student enrichment program in 8th grade, Dad asked if it came with a scholarship because we were already spending enough on Ethan's football gear. And when Ethan lost his temper and broke Mom's ceramic angel, he swore I startled him. I was upstairs, but that didn't matter. I still had to apologize for startling him. By high school, I had grown skilled at shrinking. I learned how to read a room and exit quietly. I figured out how to smile through indifference. I kept a box under my bed filled with awards and clippings, none of which ever made it to the family fridge. The fridge was for Ethan's newspaper cuttings, prom pictures, and flyers about his new business ideas, which he always started, never finished. Junior year, Ethan came to me in a rush before finals. "I need your help," he said, tossing his assignment binder on my bed. "Business case study. It's like numbers and projections and stuff." I stayed up till 3 a.m. that night, cross-checking marketing strategies with costs. He got an A. He celebrated. I slept through my own exam the next morning and failed it. Nobody asked why. College came with its own version of selective celebration. I got into a reputable school out of state. My parents blinked. "That's nice," my mom said, then turned to Ethan, who had just been rejected from his third choice. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You've always had more potential anyway." I delayed telling them I'd earned a full ride. It felt like a betrayal. When I finally did, Dad's response was, "Well, that'll free up some funds for your brother." The final thread snapped when I was 20 and home for a holiday break. A client had complained about a botched delivery at the store, Ethan's responsibility. Somehow by dinner, the story had shifted. I had interfered with the spreadsheet. I hadn't even logged into the store's system in months, but Ethan looked wounded, so my parents rallied. "Claire," Mom said, "you have to stop making things harder for your brother. He's under so much pressure." I swallowed my protest, as usual. But that night, when everyone was asleep, I opened the office drawer at the store and found a payment receipt tucked under some flyers, one Ethan had signed, for a shipment he never scheduled. I stared at it for a long time. Proof? Truth. Irrelevant. I slid the paper back where I found it. The next morning, Ethan was eating pancakes when I walked into the kitchen. He looked up, grinned, and said, "Still mad?" "Don't take everything so personally, sis." That was Ethan's way. Charm after the wreckage. But I wasn't mad. I was empty. I told myself back then that it was just a phase, that every family had favorites, and maybe if I just waited long enough, tried hard enough, they'd see me. Years later, I still hadn't realized the truth. They never wanted to. "Claire, you need to stop making everything about you." "Claire, can't you just let it go?" "Claire, why do you always play the victim?" And yet I kept coming back. I kept hoping. I kept writing Ethan's speeches. I kept losing pieces of myself. Until one day, I found something Ethan had carelessly left open on the shared computer. A crypto transfer statement linked to the store's reserve account. The amount wasn't huge, but it wasn't pocket change either. I checked the date. It was the same week he'd accused a part-timer of skimming the till. I closed the tab without saving. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hands clenched into fists against my stomach. Claire, you're being dramatic. Claire, don't ruin Thanksgiving. Claire, lower your voice. I didn't say anything. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't even cry. I just waited and watched and collected silence like stones in my pocket. Claire found a cash withdrawal receipt under Ethan's chair cushion, one for nearly $500 and a crumpled sticky note beside it. Transfer complete. Moved to ETH wallet. They say I'm suspicious, too sensitive, but if I weren't the only one checking the books, who else would? When I moved back to Portwell in January 2023, it was temporary. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Just long enough to help out while Dad recovered from his back injury, long enough to stabilize the store's accounts. I had a full-time job in Seattle that allowed remote work. I thought I could manage a few weeks of proximity without sliding back into old patterns. I was wrong. The first week back, I offered to modernize the depot's marketing materials, make some fresh flyers, maybe revamp the website. Mom smiled politely and said, "Oh, honey, that's sweet, but Ethan's handling that now." Ethan, who hadn't touched a spreadsheet since college and thought target demographics meant people who happened to walk past the store. By week 2, he was asking for money. "Short term," he said over lukewarm coffee in the staff break room, "just to cover some gaps until my crypto hits again." "From the store's account?" I asked, even though I already knew. "It's not like we're talking thousands," he shrugged. "And I'm family. Isn't this what we do?" I wanted to scream, but all I said was, "Dad should be the one to approve that." Ethan leaned in, voice dropping. "Dad owes me more than you know." I didn't answer. By week 3, the register was short again. Small amounts, just enough to avoid raising alarms. But I noticed patterns, receipts that didn't match purchases, inventory shifts with no corresponding sales. Every time I brought it up, I was met with the same refrain. "You're overanalyzing. Maybe take a break, Claire." But I couldn't. Not when every red flag screamed louder than the last. Then, one afternoon, Lance dropped by. He'd worked at the depot years ago, an older guy. Quiet, loyal to Dad. I hadn't seen him since the wedding he never showed up to. He looked thinner now. Haunted. "I heard you were back," he said quietly, leaning against the counter like he didn't want to be seen. "Just helping out," I replied. "Temporarily." He nodded, eyes darting to the office door behind me. "Careful with the books," he murmured. "Some lines don't balance." "Lance, what are you—" But he was already walking away. That night, I stayed after closing. I told Ethan I was finishing some emails for work. He grinned, tossed me the keys, and left without suspicion. I opened QuickBooks first. Some entries were altered. Timestamps didn't match activity logs. I cross-referenced with the vendor accounts. A few were fake. One flagged me immediately. PW Consultants, LLC. I clicked deeper. The account had been created 3 months prior. Multiple payouts had gone to a Chase account under the business name. The registered manager? Claire Whitmore. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding. I hadn't created this. I hadn't signed anything. Yet my name, my social security number, and my email were all listed as the owner. It was a shell, a transfer point. And Ethan had forged everything. I printed everything. 4 copies. I locked one in the store's filing cabinet under a random label, slipped the second into my laptop bag, mailed the third to my work address in Seattle, and hid the 4th inside a box of old Halloween decorations in the garage. The next day, Ethan was all charm again. "Thinking of investing in that NFT project I mentioned?" he asked casually. "No," I said. "I'm focused on the store." "You always are." He smirked. That's your thing, being responsible. I didn't respond. Just watched him sip his smoothie, paid for with store petty cash. That evening, I sent a message. Hi, Ashley. I need your help. Privately. It's about fraud, and my name's involved. Ashley Moreno had been 2 years ahead of me in high school and now worked in Seattle as a corporate attorney. We hadn't spoken in ages, but I remembered she once told me, if you ever need legal backup, I'm your girl. I never thought I'd take her up on it. She replied within the hour. Send everything. Keep copies. Don't confront anyone yet. So I did. By the end of that week, I had a folder labeled If I Disappear in my encrypted drive. It contained everything. The financial records, the fake business registration, screenshots of Ethan's crypto posts boasting about new funding, and a timeline of every suspicious withdrawal. I told no one. I acted normal at dinner, complimented Mom's casserole, let Dad ramble about the legacy of Whitmore Supply. And when Ethan called me dramatic for suggesting we update the fire escape plan, I smiled and said, "You're probably right." Because if I wasn't the one checking the books, who else would? Claire scanned the bank statements again, highlighted in red. The last withdrawal was nearly $4,000, labeled Owner Draw. She stared at the total, lips pressed tight, and then reached for her phone. Ashley, she typed. It's accelerating. I've signed the scans. We're ready if they move first. I should have known the moment Mom called for a family dinner that something wasn't right. But I still showed up, folder in hand, hoping. It was a Wednesday. Cloudy, gray, typical March in Portwell. The kind of sky that presses down on you. I drove the familiar route to my parents' house, every landmark triggering memories I didn't want. The mailbox Ethan once set on fire, by accident. The corner where I waited for rides they forgot to give. The street lamp I cried under when I didn't get into Stanford. Because they never even asked how the interview went. When I pulled up, there were too many cars. Tyler's pickup, Rachel's SUV, Aunt Gail's minivan, even my grandfather's ancient Buick, the one with the dented rear bumper and the proud Navy veteran sticker. My stomach dropped. This wasn't dinner. This was a tribunal. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Inside, the house felt staged. Everyone was already seated, like they'd been waiting for the defendant. My parents on the couch. Ethan to their right. A semicircle of family filled the room. Arms crossed, expressions tight. There she is, Dad said flatly. Now we can begin. I didn't sit. I clutched the folder tighter and scanned the room for a single friendly face. I found none. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice from trembling. We need to talk about the store, Mom said, eyes not quite meeting mine. About what you've done. I blinked. What I've done? Don't play dumb, Ethan snapped. The website, the campaigns, you tanked our customer base. The metrics show growth, I said slowly. Online traffic is up. Not that kind of growth, my grandfather cut in. You scared off our loyal folks, made us look like some overpriced boutique. That wasn't my intention, I said. I only updated the image, modernized the layout. We had agreed. You manipulated us, Aunt Gail added. With those fancy graphs and numbers, we trusted you. I opened my mouth to speak, but Ethan was faster. And then there's the loan. My pulse spiked. You pushed for that refinancing, he continued. Used your clean credit to strong-arm Dad, made it impossible for him to run the business freely. I looked directly at my father. You asked me to co-sign. I added conditions to protect everyone, including myself. You agreed. In writing, Dad stood abruptly, face red. Under pressure. You gave me no choice. You were gambling, Dad, I said before I could stop myself. You were already in over your head. The silence that followed was thick and awful. How dare you? Mom whispered. Your father is struggling. You knew? My aunt gasped. She's exaggerating, Ethan interjected. Even if he placed a few bets. She's weaponizing it. My fingers itched to open the folder, the bank statements, the shell company, the emails. But something held me back. Maybe the way my grandmother looked at me like I'd grown horns. Maybe the fact that every time I spoke, another voice shouted me down. She always plays the victim, Rachel said. Nothing's ever her fault. I've tried to help this family, I said, louder than I meant to. I've worked behind the scenes, cleaned up messes. You inserted yourself, Ethan barked, because you've always wanted to prove you're smarter. That's not true. It is, Dad said. You've never respected how we built this. Tears burned, but I refused to let them fall. The bank is calling in the loan, Mom said softly. We could lose the house. I warned you about the misuse of funds, I said. I told you. You didn't do enough, Ethan yelled. You walked away, and now we're drowning. I didn't walk away. You pushed me. He pointed to the door. You want to help? Leave. Don't come back. I turned to my mother. Mom. She looked down. I think it's best if you go. The folder slipped from my arms and hit the coffee table with a soft thud. No one touched it. I turned and walked out, footsteps echoing in the sudden, final silence. No one called after me. No one followed. In the car, I sat for a full 10 minutes before I could breathe again. My hands trembled against the steering wheel. My vision blurred. I drove back to my apartment on instinct. I didn't remember the streets. I didn't remember unlocking the door. I just collapsed on the floor, breath shallow, heart fractured. They'd picked him. Again. Always him. Even with receipts. Even with proof. They told me I ruined their lives. So I left. Claire sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, lit only by the hallway light spilling through the half-shut door. Her phone buzzed. 17 missed calls. She turned it face down, whispered aloud to no one. Maybe that's the best I can do. Just disappear. The silence after I left should have brought me peace. But peace doesn't come when your name is still on the paperwork. The first week after the confrontation passed in a haze. I didn't answer calls, didn't check texts, didn't even open my email. I turned my phone off, kept the blinds drawn, and waited for the spinning in my chest to slow. It didn't. Ashley called me on day 5. I need to meet in person, she said, tone brisk. The IRS contacted me. My stomach dropped. Already? They've been watching Whitmore Supply for months, she explained. Your documentation just helped everything click. I met her in a downtown Seattle coffee shop, tucked in a corner booth with a wall of glass behind us. She laid out a folder, one I hadn't seen before. Inside were copies of my financial disclosures, my cosigner agreement, and a new item, a subpoena. They're preparing to move forward, she said. But because your name is on those documents, Claire, they need your testimony to separate you from the fraud. I stared at my signature on the loan forms, crisp and clear. I remembered the day I signed them. My father had joked, "You always did have the best handwriting in the family." Will I be charged? I asked. But you'll need to show them exactly how you were manipulated and that you've taken precautions to protect yourself. The paper trail helps. It wasn't enough. I wanted it to be. I wanted logic and records to absolve me, to erase the ache in my ribs every time I thought about that living room. But names on paper have weight. Mine was everywhere. They're still pulling money, Ashley continued. The last transaction was 2 days ago. $4,000, labeled owner disbursement. Still? I choked. Even now? Yes. That's why they're accelerating. I nodded slowly, fingers tight around the edge of the table. What do I do? You stay quiet. You stay safe. And you let them burn themselves. That night, I sat on my balcony for the first time in weeks. The air was cold but dry. Across the courtyard, someone was playing Miles Davis. Below me, a couple argued softly in Spanish, then burst into laughter. I wanted to believe I had stepped into a different world. that I was far enough from Portwell now that it couldn't touch me. But the next morning, a text came in on my work phone. From Lance. Check the Portwell ledger. I opened the link with shaking hands. There it was. Front page local news. Whitmore Supply under investigation for financial irregularities. No names. Not yet. But the photo showed the front of the store with police tape over the entrance. I called Ashley. They raided the place this morning, she said, almost breathless. They're not wasting time. They'll see my name on everything, I whispered. They'll also see who's been withdrawing, who opened those vendor accounts, who approved the loans. And if Ethan says I helped, we'll prove otherwise. 2 days later, I received another text, this time from an unknown number. We need to talk. You can't just walk away from this. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. The calls came next. From my mother. From my father. Even Rachel, who hadn't texted me in a year. Just call us back. You're blowing this out of proportion. Don't let the IRS control the story. This is still your family. The silence shattered, but it didn't bring clarity. Only noise. Only desperation. Lance met me again outside a diner near the Portwell city limits. He looked thinner than before. Paler. They're talking to me now, he said. Agents. Investigators. You gave them your side? He nodded. I told them everything. About Ethan, about the payouts, about how you warned me to keep records. Did they believe you? They did. Because they already had your files, and because they're smart enough to know who's been lying. I felt like I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was cold. You know what Ethan said about you? Lance added, voice low. That you were always a threat. That you were the only one who paid attention. He's not wrong, I said. Lance reached into his jacket and handed me a small envelope. What's this? Old footage, he said. Security backup from the register system, just in case you want to remember how deep it went. I took it with trembling hands. Ashley texted me later that night. Formal charges incoming. Stay out of sight. They'll come for statement soon. Claire sat on the floor of her kitchen, envelope unopened beside her, as the voicemail played on loop. Her mother's voice. Shaky. Claire, your brother's been arrested. Please call me back. It wasn't satisfaction I felt when I read the headlines. It was silence. The kind that settles after a storm and leaves everything damp and hollow. Local business heir arrested in $300,000 fraud scheme. The article read. Ethan's mugshot stared back at me from my laptop screen. Unkempt hair, bruised ego, hollow eyes. Beneath it, a short paragraph described the charges. Wire fraud, identity misrepresentation, tax evasion. The article didn't mention my name, but it didn't have to. I was threaded through every dotted line, every forged form. My signature, my credit, my silence. Ashley had prepared me for this. She walked me through what the grand jury might ask, what the timeline could look like. But nothing she said prepared me for the emotionless finality of seeing him there, behind those words. Facing up to 10 years if convicted. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just shut my laptop and sat in the dark. That evening, my mother called again. I let it go to voicemail. Claire, I know you're angry, but your father's heart can't take this. He's been so stressed, and now Ethan... A sharp intake of breath. We didn't know. Please, just come home. We need to talk. Home. The word had lost its meaning. Ashley forwarded a request from the district attorney's office the next morning. They wanted a formal statement. I would be recorded on video, not as a suspect, as a witness. I stood in front of my closet for 10 minutes, staring at my clothes. Nothing seemed neutral enough. Everything either screamed too emotional or too cold. I finally picked a gray sweater and black jeans. Soft, somber, forgettable. The office was sterile and beige with overhead lights that buzzed faintly. I sat across from two people I didn't know and told them in my clearest voice how my name had been used to create a shell company, how I'd discovered unauthorized withdrawals, and how I had saved copies before walking away. I gave them the flash drive. I gave them the envelope Lance had handed me. They didn't flinch when I said Ethan's name. They nodded when I said I hadn't spoken to him since the confrontation. "You're not the first," one of them said. "You're just the only one who documented everything." The silence after the interview was deafening. I walked out onto the city sidewalk, the spring air thick with car exhaust and wet leaves, and felt the weight of 100 invisible ropes snapping one by one. Later that week, I received a formal notice. I was cleared of liability on the loan. Ashley called immediately. "It's done," she said. "The court recognized you as a misled third party. You won't owe a cent." I didn't say anything. "Claire?" she asked after a beat. I thought I'd feel more something. You feel what's left when you stop holding your breath. My inbox filled with more messages from my family, some angry, some desperate. Rachel sent a single text. "You got what you wanted. Hope it was worth it." I didn't reply. Lance messaged me a screenshot a few days later, a comment thread under the Portwell Ledger's update on the trial. One comment read, "That family always looked too polished. Now we know why." Another, "Didn't the sister help build the website? Guess she knew what was coming." Below that, a reply from someone named J. Whitmore 1971. "She betrayed her own blood. That's not family. That's revenge." I stared at that line for a long time. Ashley warned me this would happen, that the court of public opinion was often messier than the legal one, that people clung to stories that fit their guilt, that I might be safe on paper, but not in their hearts. I moved apartments that weekend, packed the few belongings I cared about, and left the rest behind. I didn't tell anyone the new address. A week later, I stood in line at a bakery on Capitol Hill, waiting for a chai latte, when someone tapped my shoulder. It was Jessica, a barista I'd met months ago during a poetry night. She squinted for a second, then smiled wide. "Claire, you're still around?" "Still here." I nodded, forcing a smile. She tilted her head. "You look different. Lighter." "Maybe I am." "You should come back to the reading next Friday. Everyone's been asking." I hesitated. "I don't have anything prepared." "Just show up. Sometimes showing up is the poem." That night I opened my journal. The pages had been blank for weeks. I wrote 4 words. I still showed up. Claire stood by her living room window, watching a faint drizzle streak the glass. Her phone buzzed once. Mom again. No message this time. Just a single call. She let it ring until it stopped, then turned away. They still think I destroyed the family. But the truth is, I walked away from a fire they lit themselves. 6 months after the indictment, I received an email from my mother. The subject line was empty. The body, just one sentence. "Your father collapsed this morning. They say it's stress. He's asking for you." I stared at it for a long time. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, waiting for my pulse to quicken, for that old tightness in my chest. But all I felt was stillness, like something had finally settled into place. I didn't respond. Instead, I closed my laptop and walked to the kitchen, where Milo, the one-eyed rescue tabby I'd adopted, rubbed against my ankle. I fed him, then made myself tea. That night, I wrote a new poem. It was about rain and stone and the quiet power of erosion. The next morning, Ashley called. "They're finalizing restitution," she said. "You won't see a dime, but they've formally absolved you of any obligation. It's over, Claire. Legally, anyway." "I know," I said softly. And I did. I knew it in the marrow of me. In the months since Ethan's arrest, the Whitmore name had crumbled. The store was liquidated. The building sold at auction to cover debts. My parents moved into a rented duplex on the outskirts of town. Rachel's real estate license was suspended for falsifying references on a home loan. Tyler had gone silent. No texts, no calls, just a ghost drifting behind the wreckage. But I was building. The new apartment, bright, spare, quiet, looked nothing like my old life. There were no family portraits on the wall, no hand-me-down furniture bought out of guilt. Instead, there were plants I actually kept alive, books I chose, a ceramic bowl I'd made in a pottery class that leaned slightly to the left but still held fruit with grace. Every Friday, I returned to the poetry reading. I never announced myself. But after the third visit, Jessica nudged me during intermission. "You should read," she said. "I'm not ready." She smiled. "Doesn't matter." So I did. The piece was short, raw, about abandonment and silence and how sometimes escape is survival. When I finished, no one clapped at first. Just stillness. Then a slow rising wave of snaps and murmurs that felt like a balm I didn't know I needed. Afterward, a young woman came up to me near the coat rack. "My dad used to say I was the problem," she whispered. "Until I left, and they finally saw who he really was. Thank you." I nodded, throat too tight to speak. Healing, I'd learned, doesn't look like triumph. It doesn't roar or shine or arrive with confetti. It's quieter, softer. It shows up when you can finally sleep through the night without flinching. When your voice doesn't tremble telling your story. When you no longer beg the past to make sense. 3 weeks later, I received another email from my mother. Longer this time. "We've lost everything. Ethan's sentencing is next month. Your father won't talk to anyone. Rachel's moved. I don't blame you anymore. I don't know if I ever truly did. I just didn't want to admit what we'd done. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. If not, I understand." There was no manipulation, no demand. Just words. I didn't reply, but I didn't block her either. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut. They just need to stay closed until someone learns how to knock without kicking. That weekend, I drove to the coast alone. I walked along the beach, let the wind tangle my hair, and screamed into the ocean until my voice cracked. Then I sat on a driftwood log and listened. Not for an answer. Just for myself. Claire stood at the edge of the water, waves curling around her shoes, as the sun dipped low and set the sky ablaze. She whispered to the wind, not expecting a response, only this: "I survived you, and I forgive you, but I won't go back." The truth was never loud. It didn't need to be. In the quiet aftermath, when the lies collapsed and the guilty stood exposed, what remained was the undeniable strength of one woman who chose herself over inherited ruin. Justice may not arrive in the moment we scream for it, but when it comes, it rewrites everything. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. Like, share, and comment below if this story moved you. Type 1 if you've ever chosen peace over pleasing.